Built on soft world building, Darkwood tells you little and hints at a lot, requiring you to piece together information from random notes and offhand comments to get a clearer picture of what's really going on. Which can be tedious because, look at how fast that you sprint. Come on, dog, it's the apocalypse out here. Pump those gams. Alright, here we go. Spoilers left and right. Starting with events prior to the start of the game. Poland, 1975. Mysterious light falls from the sky and crashes into the titular Darkwood. Unfortunately for everybody in the region, it's not just a nifty meteorite. No, it brings with it an entity known only as the Being. Within a few years of the Being's arrival, a plague has swept over most of the region, infecting people and animals. The trees grow impossibly fast and begin to choke out the land. The people living in Darkwood are cut off from the rest of the world. Hoping to work around this, the government constructs tunnels, which, except for the part where trees have roots and roots are, underground, is a great idea. By 1983, the Darkwood survivors are barely making it. A large swath of land has flooded, creating a swamp and destroying the fields and crops. Another village was just clawing by eating the pigs born from the mother of all pigs, who looks completely normal and not at all monstrous, and I'm sure eating pigs born from her is not a problem at all. By the time we get there during the course of the game, the mother of all pigs is starving, and soon, so too will the village. Starvation, mixed with symptoms of the plague, make Darkwood even more dangerous and further alienate the people trapped within. Teams are sent in by the government through the secret tunnels to monitor the situation and research the plague. By at least 1983, villagers noticed these teams, referring to them simply as outsiders. Notes and bodies in the tunnel indicate that villagers, mostly savages, had found the tunnels. However, any survivor encountered this way was shot. Why is never explicitly stated, but the area is quarantined, so... The research doesn't seem to be going great, though they did discover that inside of the roots of the trees is what they call a white goo. And said white goo has shape-shifting qualities which are lost after being removed from the root. Our POV, simply called the Stranger, is an outsider sent deep into Darkwood, not far from Sector 0. It appears his team were studying the white substance and the possibility that electricity runs through the roots as well. The team was attacked by savages, with the Stranger being the only survivor. The savages tied at least 3 of the outsiders to trees, including the still living Stranger, who eventually escapes. For reasons that aren't even known to him, he swaps clothes with the Scarecrow. My guess would be for stealth. Hazmat suits are not the most stealthy option on the rack, but he says he doesn't remember, so... The Stranger then makes his way from the swamp to the old woods, which is one hell of a trek, and collapses from his wounds. In the prologue of the game, we play as the Doctor. He's been trying to help with the plague, but what can you do? While gathering supplies, he stumbles upon the Stranger and quickly realizes he's an outsider, so the would-be rescue turns into more of a kidnapping. The Doctor steals the Stranger's key to the government tunnels and rips out all the pages from his journal. The Doctor patches up the Stranger and then proceeds to make more wounds as he interrogates him. Unfortunately for both parties involved, the Stranger can't speak anymore, so this doesn't get the Doctor anywhere. And you know what? Forget the Stranger, he's Harry Houdini. He escapes another set of rope bindings and then pretty quickly starts having severe hallucinations. One moment there's a normal radio laying on the floor, and in the next moment there's a twitching body with dials in place of its eyes. The hallucination is pretty dang useful in this case, uttering a code to a combination lock elsewhere in the house. The Stranger is attacked by another man being held captive in the house, because diplomacy is for nerds. Why bother taking time to talk with the guy who just opened the room that you've been locked up in, and who is pretty obviously not the same man as the one who locked you in it in the first place? The stranger hallucinates that chompers attack the house when the reality is the stranger kind of just has bad timing. The villagers, being a gaggle of certified geniuses, formed a mob and attacked the doctor's house. The doctor had fled the house by this point, as he suspected the villagers blamed and hated him. The stranger is rescued again by Night Trader, who takes him to an established hideout in the dry meadow. From this point, what happens is player determinant to a large degree. On his second day of survival, the stranger meets a man called Wolfman, who is a man and also a wolf. Look, this happens a lot in Darkwood. Things are very descriptively named. Wolfman offers to help the stranger find the doctor who stole his key. You can follow his quest line and do a morally questionable thing, say, oh, help him kidnap a lady so he can eat her? Or you can follow a different quest line to track down the doctor. Or you can go full crazy mode and murder everything in the Darkwood. Either way, the stranger finds the doctor again and gets access to Tunnel 21, which leads to the swamp. He continues through the swamp and ends up in Sector 0. He walks down the road home before he has to dip back into the woods. When he finally emerges, he's back in his town. There are 2 endings available, with a variant epilogue if the stranger went crazy mode on all the innocent and not so innocent beings in Darkwood. Either the stranger goes back to his apartment, takes off his scarecrow getup, pets his doggo, has a nice bowl of soup, and then gets in bed for a nice nap. This is called the bliss ending. Or the stranger can notice any number of inconsistencies, such as no matter how far he runs up and down the streets of the town, he always finds himself right back in front of his apartment. Or the crack in the wall filled to the brim with red chompers. If he notices enough of these inconsistencies, he can access the burn them all ending. He digs up the floorboards like he's from the Telltale Heart and finds a hole under his bed. Crawling through it, he wakes up on the other side completely naked. Thank God this game's in top-down. He finds himself in a vine-covered valley along with dozens and dozens of other sleepers, some alive, some barely alive, and many more dead. At the center, he finds the being, a pulsing white mass. He can try to talk to it, but it doesn't answer. It does try to sway him into just going to sleep, but the stranger resists and finds another sleeper nearby. The stranger recognizes him as Maciek, one of the outsiders. He pries the flamethrower from Maciek and uses it to burn the being alive and set the forest ablaze. This kills almost everybody left in Darkwood, including the stranger, but it puts an end to the being, the hallucinations, the shape-shifting, and the plague. In the next section, I'll be going over all the characters in alphabetical order, roughly. But before we do that, there are a few concepts that I need to go over, otherwise half of what I say in the following section just ain't gonna make any sense. Firstly, the plague. It appears there are 3 ways to contract the plague: breathing in the being's spores, making direct contact with the being, or making indirect contact with the being, such as consuming a part of it. Outsiders sent into Darkwood wore hazmat suits to prevent inhalation and physical contact with the being, and presumably were just smart enough not to eat strange shit while they were investigating an unknown plague. There are a bunch of physical and mental symptoms caused by the plague, and 2 distinct fates waiting at the other end, with the time to kill varying wildly. Through the course of the game, we see both. Firstly, the Savage, which has less physical symptoms than the other, but gets a whole heaping of mental deterioration as a trade-off. Savages exhibit excessive compulsive behavior, including a compulsion to consume wood, severe auditory and visual hallucinations, insomnia, loss of appetite, and heightened aggression. There's also evidence that the Savages are trying to become a tree. In a location known as the Savage Lair, one Savage is burying himself in a hole. So we can add wants to become an evergreen to the list of symptoms. Eventually, infectees abandon their homes and embrace the lifestyle of a savage, which includes dressing up in a lot of mud and sticks, drawing strange symbols in the earth, constructing shrines, and finding and/or/making carcasses to tie up to trees. Though never confirmed, it is heavily implied that the stranger has contracted the plague. He was forced into direct contact with the being when he was tied to the tree after his squad was attacked. The hazmat suit that is implied to be his, found on the Scarecrow he Terminator 2'd, is heavily damaged. Unless he did all of that damage while pulling his Houdini, he wasn't protected while he was hanging up there in the tree for who knows how long. A journal entry available from the start flat out tells us he hasn't felt the need to eat since the accident, and it doesn't take long to realize that he has hallucinations. But a more clear example is the Doctor, who we see become more and more disheveled and compulsive, covering himself in mud and sticks until he looks so much like the savages that you fight in game that it isn't uncommon to see someone post about how they saw him and blasted his sticks clean off with a shotgun because they mistook him for one of the hostile savages. Now, as bad as that is, the other fate is arguably worse. It ends in the victim becoming a red chomper whose name does a pretty solid job giving you the mental image of what they look like. They're highly aggressive and incredibly dangerous creatures that look like a walking pair of crocodile jaws, but flipped on their side. The symptoms include accelerated and asymmetrical growth, including growth of additional things like teeth, hair loss, and slightly more concerning, the body begins to split in two, starting from the top of the head all the way down to the waist. They also suffer some degree of mental deterioration, but it seems to be a lot less severe than compared to the savage. At some stage of the infection, the chomper-to-be falls into a slumber as it gets ready to complete its transformation. This is the tragic fate of a boy called Musician. He's also an example of how the infection rate varies wildly. He's young, but definitely old enough to have been born before the plague. Then compare him to the Doctor, who is roughly middle-aged. There's no real evidence to suggest the Doctor was artfully dodging infection, so until recently, the Doctor's infection was just chillin', and then, like with Musician, it decided to set in rapidly. Esssence. There isn't a lot I can say here because you just aren't told much about Esssence, but I do refer to it later, and I want you to have some idea of what I'm talking about. Esssence is the stuff the stranger injects into himself to level up and gain positive and negative traits. It's cooked down from various consumables, collectively known as hallucinogens. The primary source is the odd mushrooms growing everywhere, and meat taken off of various monsters. The Doctor is implied to have used Esssence on the stranger to interrogate him. He may do this a second time depending on player actions. The stranger describes a terrible headache, blurred vision, and feeling weak to the point of being paralyzed. The stranger's self-dosing is probably more for the mechanic than an actual occurrence, but if you want to run with the idea that he does, and he is definitely thirsty for mushrooms at least, then this suggests that the Doctor dosed him with a lot. For comparison, he gets up to 10,870, presumably milliliters of Esssence in one of his dosages. But again, this is probably just a scaling mechanic and shouldn't be taken literally. Esssence is essentially liquid plague. There are two instances where consuming Esssence led to infection and mutation. A dog is depicted as having eaten red mushrooms and then hurting his owner, having likely turned from regular dog to huge dog. And if Musician comes to Chapter 2 with a stranger and is then fed an item that can be distilled into Esssence, he mutates horribly and at record pace before vanishing. The fact that the stranger was dosed in the prologue and he doesn't show any further signs of deterioration to me proves that he was already infected by the time the essence was injected. Shiny stones. These have essentially been confirmed as fragments of the meteor which brought the being to Darkwood. They are highly reflective, and when viewed up close, they have a glow coming from inside. The glow is bright enough that it even creates god rays, if that's the right term. I think this suggests that the meteor wasn't a regular meteor, but a part of the being too. And if this is true, then touching a shiny stone would expose you to the plague. They are considered valuable by a few different groups. Traders give a good amount of reputation if you give it to them, which is probably just a mechanical benefit. The three might have reason to care, but why does Night Trader? Oh, you found one of those shiny stones that are all over the place? Good job! Here, have a mushroom. Second, villagers seem to like them. You can find one on an effigy within a shrine right outside of the forest village. Sometimes they're in containers in homes. Maybe they barter with them too, maybe they just think they look cool. However, I think this is more likely a byproduct of point 3, but I thought I'd mention it. Third, plague victims like them. More specifically, those running down the savage track. There is an effigy with a shiny stone in place of its head, which can be found on the body of a savage just inside the swamp hideout cellar. There is also one created by the doctor when he has almost completely succumbed to the plague. And finally, white goo. The white goo, found within the roots of the false trees, has shape-shifting properties which the being can use to replicate things that it comes into contact with, both organic and inorganic. However, the being isn't super skilled at this, as most of these replicas are pretty inaccurate. There are a handful of giveaways that something is a replica. Pale white appearance, a matte texture, mushroom or mushroom-like appearance, especially these clusters, being almost there, especially in case of items like this key, and in the case of organic beings, hybridization. The most common and numerous replicas are, of course, the false trees. One note left by the outsider calculates that only 15% of the trees in Darkwood are actual trees, with the rest being liars. The being may also replicate what I call tableaus, such as this partially made replica of the Dry Meadow hideout, which can be found in the Old Woods. It even went so far as to replicate the stranger mid-step headed towards the workbench. But perhaps the most convincing replica of them all is Mushroom Granny. She has the papery white skin and, well, mushrooms that we talked about before. And in one of her epilogues, quote, she remembered her previous incarnation. An easy way to tell the difference between a plaguee and a replicant is that a plague victim will still largely look the same. A human looks human, a dog looks like a dog, while organic replicants are hybridized. Mushroom plus granny, wolf plus man. Starting off the list of characters with perhaps one of the most irrelevant yet very useful NPCs in the game. Bike Man is a minor character who doesn't have a lot going on for him. He is not plot relevant at all. He's a talking game mechanic. Specifically, he lets you gather all items and containers within one hideout and deliver them to whatever your current hideout is, a service that he offers for the cost of a bottle of alcohol, unless you make the mistake of leaving alcohol in your hideout, in which case it's all of the alcohol, but at least he'll let you keep the bottle. His few interactions make it clear that he is plastered and would very much like to be so at all times. He's also polite in the doing it to get my way kind of way, which is still nice given most people in Darkwood don't even try. He has no epilogues, which leads me to believe he was always intended to be a minor character who just provides very large amounts of convenience. Chicken Lady, on the other hand, is a significant plot character. She is one of the options for finding the doctor. She is an old woman with gray hair and weirdly ashy skin. What's going on with her chin? She's wearing a heavy coat and the iconic old lady scarf on her head. She lives in the village in the Old Woods with her sister, Pretty Lady. As the name suggests, She keeps a lot of chickens. She even calls them her little sisters a few times, suggesting she might view them more as family than food. If you show her the plastic chick that you can obtain in the prologue, she will say it belongs to her little brother, Janek. This means he's the man who opts to skip the diplomacy straight to fisticuffs. She dislikes local village boy musician because he is as terrible at playing Frere Jacques as I am at pronouncing it. Oh, and he wants to marry her sister because he fished up her wreath during the last Kupala night, even though he looks and acts like he could be maybe 11 years old. Anyway, considering that if the stranger plays his cards just right, the chicken lady adopts musician in one of the epilogues, and she seems genuinely upset by his death, it's probably more frustration than actual hatred for him. Why do I use a word I can't pronounce? And though it may not seem like it because she's keeping her locked in the room, Chicken Lady cares deeply for her plagued sister. And nowhere is this more evident than her epilogues. In one, she journeys into the woods by herself to try and find her. In another, she remains behind in the abandoned village after the villagers eat all of her chickens so she can tend to her sister. Chicken Lady is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the paths to finding the doctor and getting the key back. If the stranger gives Pretty Lady's room key to Wolfman, Chicken Lady will tell the stranger that her sister has gone missing. Wolfman will already offer to take the stranger to the doctor at this point, but the stranger can show Chicken Lady the bloodied showl. She'll curse the doctor and throw a crumpled note at the stranger, which has directions to the doctor's home. As for epilogues, the Chicken Lady has quite a few possibilities. In the bliss endings, if the stranger follows the musician's path and also kills the mother of pigs, then Chicken Lady has a not so blissful ending. The villagers eat all of her chickens and abandon the village. Chicken Lady remains in despair, burning with hatred for the villagers for what they did, and continues taking care of her sister. However, after weeks of fighting off starvation, she dies and is eaten by her sister. Alternatively, if the sow is not killed, she will continue to take care of her sister, but will one day find that her sister has somehow escaped. If the stranger follows Wolfman's path, the Chicken Lady will leave the village to try and search for her sister, and she never comes back. If the stranger unlocks the sister's room, then follows the musician's path, kills musician's parents to make sure he isn't killed by them, and then goes back and kills Pretty Lady, then the Chicken Lady will be deeply saddened, which brings her closer to musician. She adopts him, caring for him like she cared for her sister, which I hope doesn't include being locked into a room. If the stranger does all of the above, but lets musician die, then Chicken Lady will fall into despair, close herself in her home, and never leave. In the burn them all endings, if Pretty Lady is still alive, then Chicken Lady will try to carry her sick sister out of their home, and both will be crushed to death when the ceiling collapses from fire damage. If Pretty Lady is dead, then the Chicken Lady will simply allow herself to be burned alive. And finally, if the stranger followed the Wolfman's path, the Chicken Lady will still go into the woods to try and find her, but is said to have lost the way. Child. A young boy who ran away from his family, known as the Elephants. He told his mother that his granny would take him mushrooming and then he never came home. There isn't much to say about him that doesn't veer into the larger story of the Elephants family, which I'm going to cover in a later entry, so, he's got blonde hair, he's wearing plain clothes, he's shy, saying nothing except a rhyme about a bear or uttering granny, and he likes to draw. If he is brought back to his mother, she will lock him in his room. In the bliss ending, if he is left with Mushroom Granny, he will move in with her and live happily. If he is brought home, the mother will keep him locked in his room as punishment for his escape attempt. In Burn Them All endings, oh boy, If he's living with Mushroom Granny, he will successfully survive the fire by hiding in the swamp. After the fire burns out, he heads to the swamp cottage, hoping that his family is still alive. If he is back home, he will burn alive with his brothers and his mother. Cripple. The Cripple is the last survivor of the swamp village. He lost his legs during the war and lost his home and pig farm when the government burned it to the ground during the early days of the plague. He once lived with someone called Zoka, but it's hard to say if it was his wife or his daughter. He says her voice is among those of the talking tree that call out to him. Given that the talking tree was created the night of the attempted heist in the food stores, more on that later, this suggests that Zoka was alive at least until that night. The Cripple is aware that the talking tree and the road home are tricks and asks the stranger to burn the tree down, instructing him to go to a cellar to reach the tree's roots. If the stranger hasn't already met the elephants at this point and completed their quest, he will point him to their home and tell the stranger to get an oxygen tank from them. The stranger can do so, finding a way to burn the tree down after a wee hallucination. Oh, and a day passes. That thing is big and it needs some time to cook, you know? The Cripple will say nothing after you set the tree on fire. He just stares with possibly blind eyes. You know, it's kind of hard to tell. He says he's blind, but he also acts like sometimes he's not. And he is gone by the next morning. He's encountered one final time crawling his way along the road home. Without the tree blocking his way, the call of the being was too strong. He doesn't get an epilogue if you burn the tree and get the bliss ending, but he will burn alive on the edge of the road home if you burn them all. Alternatively, with a lot of effort, the stranger can spare the tree by going around it. This prevents the Cripple from making it to the road home and dooms him to go insane from listening to the tree or be burnt alive. The Doctor is the man who saved, then promptly robbed, drugged, and beat up the stranger in the prologue. He is a middle-aged, balding, bespectacled man always seen with a lit cigarette. He's also got a thing for booze, but not bike man levels, thankfully, although that might explain some of his instructions. More on that in a minute. He has a wife and daughter, though their fates are a little unclear. He hears his daughter's voice calling for him, but unlike the Cripple, he doesn't mention that, you know, that person is supposed to be dead, which could mean they're alive somewhere. He doesn't know they're dead, or he simply refuses to believe it. There is evidence to suggest they were evacuated. This comes in the form of a photo showing him and his wife and child, which is torn in half. The Doctor has the half showing the wife and child in his hideout within the train wreck. The other half is found on a body in the wreckage of a helicopter. It seems kind of, well, dumb for the devs to put the photo in a helicopter crash if they didn't want us to assume his wife and child died in that helicopter crash. There is reason to believe that the Doctor either organized or participated in making a bunker of sorts in the basement of a church. Though his connection to it is thin, it's either go with the one character we know as a doctor and is the only local doctor, or the devs didn't think it would be confusing to imply a doctor had something to do with it, but it's actually a completely different doctor. There is a story that comes out of this little project of the Doctor's, which I cover in their entry, but the Doctor's part in it is not fleshed out, with the only certain thing being it failed. The Doctor attended to Pretty Lady as seen in the train wreck dream. He visited her during the initial stages of the plague and witnessed her transformation into her giant, mutated form. At a certain point, he bound her arms and legs. Janek, her brother, screamed at the Doctor that he was a charlatan. He left Chicken Lady with instructions for her care, which show that by this point he was getting desperate to find a solution. Or drunk. Her instructions read, remove growths using a sterilized knife, washed in spirits or boiled. In case the wounds or ulcerations open, put... God, I don't want to read it. Put bean seeds inside. In case of emergency, does an intense need to vomit count? You'll find the path to my home in the old woods. The train wreck dream also shows the increasing desperation and hostility of the villagers, which lead to him abandoning his home as seen in the prologue. The stranger spends the entire first half of the game trying to track him down, doing favors or just murdering his way into information of the doctor's hideout. If the stranger goes through the musician's path to the doctor, he will basically repeat what he did to him in the prologue, drug him again, and interrogate him. The stranger can ally with him and willingly show him the government tunnels, or he can kill him. If the doctor makes it to chapter 2, you witness his descent into savagery. He coats himself in mud and sticks, and even eats a bit of both for funsies. In the bliss endings, the doctor can either survive to falsely reunite with his family, much the same as the stranger, or if the stranger died in the train wreck dream, he will flee into the woods, afraid that the stranger is out to get him. He eventually fully succumbs to the plague and embraces the forest as his new home. In Burn Them All, he either, again, is holed up somewhere deep in the woods, he is implied to survive, tormented by the whispers of his daughter, or he will not even wake up as the flames consume him. Elephants is a nickname given by the Cripple to a family who lives in a heavily barricaded home in the swamp. The reason for the nickname is the gas masks that they're always wearing. The family consists of a mother and 4 children. 2 can be seen with her at all times. The 3rd, Marcinek, ran away recently, and the 4th, the eldest, can be found deceased in a shed not far from the cottage. The mother is very religious, making repeated references to the devil and demons. She thinks the devil is in the air, and that's what's causing all the problems in Darkwood. She says that her eldest, aka the sadly deceased one, is blessed and provides them with clean air to keep them safe. She clearly loves her kiddos, but she's a bit of a disciplinarian. Definitely not the sweet bubbly type. Not while the stranger's there, anyway. She whacks one of her kids on the back of his head because he starts reciting a rhyme in front of him, and she isn't exactly verbally loving either. The mother asks the stranger to find and return her runaway Marcinek. When he's brought back, the mother locks him in his room, and she gives the stranger an oxygen tank that he needs to travel through parts of the swamp and progress the plot. As with everything in Darkwood, the stranger can slaughter her and take the oxygen tank from her body, which is up there on the list of whacked up shit that a video game protagonist can do in their own self-interest. The elephants have a bit more story to unravel, but it connects with a few other characters, and I'm gonna hold on to it until we get to that last major player in the story. It'll be easier for us all that way. In the bliss endings, if the stranger didn't bring back Marcinek, then the mother will eventually hear a voice coming from the depths of the forest. She will barricade her kids in the cottage with enough food for a couple of days, and then, overcoming her fear of the woods, venture out, listening for the voice again, hoping to find Marcinek on her own. If Marcinek is brought back, the family will continue to live in their barricaded home while Marcinek is kept locked in his room. And in the Burn Them All ending, they only have one fate: to burn alive as the flames consume the woods. Maciek was an outsider operating in the old woods. Somehow, despite all of the steps taken by outsiders to protect themselves, he contracted the plague. According to the desertion note, he began to ramble about someone named Maciek, who the author says was his younger brother or son. He does this for 3 days before he disappears with all of his equipment, stuff to survive, as well as a flamethrower and whatever his beloved spitter is. He also took his quote-unquote lucky stone. They report his desertion and 7 men are sent to retrieve him, but clearly this fails as we find him buck naked by the being in the Burn Them All ending. The uncomfortable close-up we get of him shows that the flamethrower has some sort of beads wrapped around the nozzle. Maciek appears to refer to the flamethrower as her, which could be chalked up to the weird human habit of referring to objects as she's or he's, but the trend with the being is to lure sleepers with the voices of loved ones, as seen with the doctor and even the stranger, and entice them to stay with illusions of a perfect life. So chances are good that from Maciek's perspective, the flamethrower is some important woman in his life. If Maciek is his son, then the woman is likely his wife. Mushroom Granny is a chain-smoking old woman with pale skin, sitting in a rocking chair with yarn and knitting needles in her lap and mushrooms growing from her scalp. And Mushroom Granny is our signal to finally talk about the greater story involving Maciek and the elephants. See, Mushroom Granny is a replica of an old woman who lived in the swamp village. Her home in the mushroom glade and parts of its surroundings are also replicas. The originals can still be seen back at the village. The replica keys found in Mushroom Granny's home open the original home, which yields, among other things, a photo of a family. The photo, when shown to Cripple and Mushroom Granny, reveals some juicy backstory. Cripple says the old woman in the photo was left alone when her daughter lost it entirely and ran off into the woods with her kids. The old lady was devastated by this, and village rumor has it that she crawled off into the swamp in search of her daughter and grandkids. Mushroom Granny confirms that the younger woman in the photo is her child and that I'd look for her, but my legs don't work how they used to. When shown the photo of a family, Elephant Mother all but confirms it's of her and her family, saying, "That was a long time ago. A long time ago." Which is an odd thing to say if it's not a photo of you. An additional connection is established by Cripple while talking about a different photo, which prompts him to say that the three boys appearing in said photo were left with their father when their mother lost it completely and ran off into the swamp with her four youngest. The elephants consist of a mother, her three living children, and a fourth dead child. Father and three eldest children remained in the swamp after the elephant mother left them. Cripple says the boys were sickly and weak, and at some point the father concluded that they were receiving less food rations. It isn't clear if this was justified in any way, but the father gathered up some like-minded villagers and tried to raid the food stores. This didn't go as planned, resulting in the father being killed and the three boys being exiled. Cripple doesn't know their fate after that, but relates the village rumor about them wandering the woods looking for their place. Now, there is more to the story of those three boys, but while I think it's all but confirmed, it isn't actually as concrete as the connection between Mushroom Granny, the elephants, the thieves, and his three boys. So, yes, I will be putting that off until later. Circling back around to Mushroom Granny and her part in the plot rather than backstory. She is a part of the greater questline to get an oxygen tank, albeit optional. If the player pursues the questline, how much of an impact she has is dependent. First, the stranger can just kill her and take her key to gain access to Maciek and continue the quest. If the stranger wants to not be a psycho, her part instead depends on whether the stranger killed the sow before coming to the swamp. If the sow's alive, then Mushroom Granny lets the stranger take Maciek home so long as he wants to go with him. If she's dead, then Mushroom Granny runs into a wee problem. The starving villagers want to eat her, and so she asks you to do something about it. The villagers are holed up in the quarry, with many of them being sick. The stranger has a few options. Kill them all, kill only the healthy ones that pose a risk to Mushroom Granny, simply lie to her that you did what she asked, or trap the villagers in the quarry by blocking the entrance with a huge boulder. If the stranger takes care of the villager problem for her, she lets him take Maciek home and knits him a sweater. Aww. On a significantly less aww note, the stranger can pluck mushrooms from her hair. I'm actually getting a little nauseous just looking at those words in the script. On an even more disgusting note, the stranger can flat out eat her, musing to himself that she's too weak to stop him and that she's delicious. As swiftly as I would like to move on from that, can we get a big round of applause for Mushroom Granny before we go? Well, original Granny mostly, but also Mushroom Granny. She literally crawled into the swamp to try and find her daughter and grandkids. Also, the paintings that she made are pivotal in hammering down parts of the timeline. Go Granny! Musician. Perhaps the saddest character in all of the Twisted Woods. He is a severely mutated boy of around, and this is just my guess, About 11 or 12, he has an oversized head with craggly, bark-like skin and no hair. He hides his face behind a comically small mask with a Pinocchio nose. He tells the stranger that the doctor gave him the mask so he could, quote, be healed of his afflictions. Guessing that was a sounded like the right thing to say at the time situation? Musician is fidgety and excessively polite. He struggles to talk, stammering over every other word. And I feel for the poor fella, I really do, but boy, is it hard to read his dialogue. Despite first appearances, so to speak, he is not an orphan and has both parents. Not much is known about them. He speaks fondly of his mother, mentioning she works the fields and that she's a violinist. The father is said to have beaten him with a belt in one epilogue, pointing to him being at least old-fashioned, but given musician's nervous and overly polite manner, I'd wager on abusive. He used to live with his parents in Old Woods. The exact order of events isn't clear, but the parents contracted the plague at some point, and musician came to believe his parents were angry at him. I've seen this interpreted a few ways. Some believe that the parents fell into the coma-like state that occurs before a victim turns a full red chomper, and that musician thought that they were ignoring him because they were angry at him. Alternatively, the parents realized what was happening and wanted to protect their son, so they acted angry with him to force him to leave and stay away. Based on his dialogue, when you give him his mother's violin, he was aware that she wasn't feeling tip-top, as he asks if she is feeling well. Personally, I lean more toward what I call the butterfree, aka they forced him away by pretending to be angry so that he wouldn't be there when they turned. I base this mostly on the fact that his parents are aware and coherent, in the mom's case anyway. Either way, musician ran from home to live in the silo not far from the village in Silent Forest. Chicken Lady's brother Janek was kind to him and played with him at the well in the village. Musician attended the village's Kupala night, assuming the villagers held this celebration at the time of year of their real-world counterpart. That places the event in late June, or roughly 3 months before the events of the game. During the celebration, he fished up Pretty Lady's wreath, resulting in his fascination with her. He has seen Pretty Lady before, as he comments on her appearance, but he seems to be completely unaware of the whole cannibal thing. If the stranger follows the musician's path rather than Wolfman, he will be tasked with finding musician's home in Old Woods. He believes that Pretty Lady will mock his simple, broken violin, so he wants to impress her with his mother's beautiful violin. The stranger finds musician's parents in their home, immobile. The father is slumped at a chair and described as having pale skin, sunken eyes, and black teeth. He looks dead, but he still twitches. In the bathroom is a woman in a tub, also twitching. The stranger notes that she's been in the water for a long time. Both are capable of small amounts of vocalizations. The father is incomprehensible, but the mother begs the stranger not to take her violin. If he takes it anyway, she says, "You'll pay." After which, both parents will suddenly transform into red chompers and try to kill the stranger. However, if the stranger gives the mother the drawings from musician, he won't be attacked. Once given his mother's violin, musician will tell the stranger where to find the doctor, as he believes that the stranger could use the doctor's help. Poor fella has no idea what the stranger would like to do to that doctor. It is possible for the musician to appear in Chapter 2. I haven't been able to get him to spawn myself, but supposedly, by following Wolfman's path up until Chapter 2 and killing the mother of pigs, he will pop up one night in the hideout, which, incidentally, is exactly what I did for my first playthrough, but no dice. Anyway, without the pig to provide food, the villagers go at the trees in a frenzy and manage to break through, arriving in the swamp. Musician followed them, but was kicked out of the camp in the quarry. He will appear one night in the swamp hideout, hidden in a formerly locked room. His mutations have accelerated, like 1 to 100 in the short time between their last meeting. He is gigantic compared to the size he used to be. His jaw hangs open with rows of teeth. His skull is beginning to split from the top. He huddles in the corner, hugging scrawny knees. The stranger says his voice is horribly distorted and resounding, but still that of a child. He apologizes for being there, saying he had no idea it was the stranger's home. He begs the stranger to let him stay, saying that he can cover him with something if he doesn't want to look at him. He'll eventually ask the stranger for some food. The stranger can give him regular food, or he can make me question his ability to even take care of his own doggo and feed him hallucinogens. Like, any one of the mushrooms the stranger is always lusting after. If he does that for some godforsaken reason, he'll find the boy, well, horribly mutated, doesn't even come remotely close. He's huge, spilling out of the room that he was once able to hide in a corner of. He can't speak or be interacted with in any way anymore. By the next day, he's gone, leaving behind only a room coated in this damaging slime. Epilogue-wise, he's tied with the villagers for the most possibilities. Starting with Bliss. If you ignore him, he is said to move back to the silo and throw away his violin and gramophone. Instead, he listens to the hum of the forest, which calms his scattered thoughts. If the stranger follows his path, but kills his parents, he'll do the exact same, except one day he will disappear into the forest, following his mother's voice. If the stranger doesn't kill his parents, Musician will return home and find them turned into chompers. The game takes the opportunity to really rub it in by saying he tried to cover himself using the violin, but to no avail. This time, the father did not use the belt, but his new rows of teeth. If the stranger kills Chicken Lady, Musician will eventually make it into Pretty Lady's room. He unties her and embraces her, his dream finally coming true. And then Pretty Lady eats him. The conditions on this next one are unknown, and I am not playing through the game multiple times to noodle it out. Maybe Musician's path, but don't give him the violin? Musician will continue trying to court Pretty Lady, but one day she goes missing. Chicken Lady burns her bedding, and grief-stricken, he leaves the village. His violin could be heard in the woods for a long time. If the stranger follows Wolfman's path and kills the sow, he is said to have waited many weeks for the stranger to come back to the hideout. One day, the trapdoor to the underground tunnels opened. He traveled through the tunnels, and to his despair, he had to leave his violin behind. And if you feed him a hallucinogen, the boy waits for many weeks, his body growing every day. He stays in the swamp hideout and never leaves. There are only 2 known outcomes for him in Burn Them All, though they are slightly confusing. See, in both, he's said to be in an old hut. In one, it's described as having a trapdoor leading to the underground tunnels, and in the other, there's no mention of the trapdoor, but it's said to be in the swamp, which should have a trapdoor. If the player follows Wolfman's path and kills the sow, he hides in the swamp hideout and dies in the fire. But if he's not in the swamp hideout, he hides in an old hut with a trapdoor leading to the underground tunnels, meaning, I guess, that he's on the dry meadow side? Either way, he survives the fire. After the flames die out, the trapdoor opens and he leaves the woods. Night Trader is the man who rescued the stranger from the doctor's house after it was raided by the village, bringing him to the dry meadow hideout. He appears every dawn and will barter goods for reputation, which is gained by simply surviving the night or trading goods with him. He follows the stranger to each new hideout until Chapter 2. The stranger implies that Night Trader is capable of speech, as he can see his lips moving, but he can't make any of the sounds out thanks to the helmet. Instead, he communicates with gestures and by drawing on his wool glove in charcoal. Night Trader is a replica, with multiple pieces of evidence hinting at this from your earliest interaction with him. And the first is staring you right in the face. The mushrooms all over his mask. Then you have the stranger's descriptions of him. The repeated use of the word matte, the way the helmet appears to be literally attached to his body. His skin being as pale as paper, the scent of mushrooms, and when he gets a good look at the trader's body, he sees horrid growths and reaffirms that the porous helmet is a part of his body. Replicated items are always this pale, milky, icky mushroom color and have these mushroom-like shapes, which, if growing out of a guy's torso, could easily be described as horrid growths. Finally, there's the replicated items that he is carrying. He doesn't offer these for sale, which you would think he would if he's just a goof who collects stuff to sell. Now, these are personal items, which you don't get to see until he's dearly departed. There's more to this, but it lands in theory territory, so I'll cover it there. As the stranger progresses deeper into the forest, he tells them there's no way out, that they're stuck with each other, that the forest wants to devour you, you're heading straight into its jaws, and finally, do not open the door, let's stick together. These lines indicate that he is aware that the tunnel can only lead deeper into Darkwood and that the being is luring him. Night Trader follows the stranger to the swamp but is killed outside of his hideout after the first night. Given the blood around his body, it seems like he was killed where his body was found. He was decapitated and the word liar has been scratched into his helmet's viewfinder. Interestingly, the stranger does not recognize the body as Night Trader. He simply says there's a body wearing a helmet and that his head has been severed. When we first met him, the stranger described him as disturbingly familiar, but now that he's looking at his dead body, nothing. Piotrek, a strange little man who has very little impact on the plot. He's wearing a bizarre metal hat, too many watches, and holding on to a robot toy. He's obsessed with everything space, finding every opportunity he can to bring the conversation back around to it. He even says he's never looked at a picture without his favorite astronaut in it. Fittingly, he offers a side quest to help him finish his rocket ship that he's been making out of tractor parts. If you give him all the parts, he will disappear for the remainder of Chapter 1. Once you make it to the junkyard in Chapter 2, you can find the wreckage of the rocket and Piotrek's dead body with some loot. This has the side benefit of clearing out hostiles from the junkyard. Alternatively, if you start Piotrek's quest and then show any of the parts to Wolfman, he mocks the stranger, because of course he does, he's Wolfman, and then concocts a needlessly cruel and evil plan, because of course he does. He's Wolfman. He wants to take the parts and sabotage them before the stranger gives them to Piotrek. The result is similar to helping Piotrek normally, except the rocket and his body aren't in the junkyard. So no loot, but the hostiles are still gone. Pretty Lady is the ironic name given to Chicken Lady's captive sister, given to her by the infatuated musician. Nothing about her prior to catching the plague is known, not even her true name. The train wreck dream sequence shows what happened to her. She grew huge and horribly mutated at an astounding pace. She constantly twitches and jerks her disproportionate limb, leading the doctor to binding both her arms and legs. As of the present day, she's doing what could be called living in a locked room within her sister's house. The stranger can use the key that both Wolfman and musician covet and go into the room himself, where he finds her writhing under some fabric. If he takes the fabric, she asks him in broken speech to cover her again, showing that she is still very much aware. As seen in some of the epilogues, she is a cannibal, presumably as a result of the plague and not like some dark Chicken Lady family secret. This is very likely why she is kept locked away and bound. After a musician fished out her wreath during the village's Kupala night celebration, he became obsessed with her. Much to the frustration of Chicken Lady and anyone with ear holes, he frequently plays his violin outside her window. Wolfman is also obsessed with her for similar yet entirely not similar reasons. Similar because Pretty Lady is Wolfman's single deepest desire, and he refers to her as his girl, his sweet little lady, and calls her beautiful. And entirely not similar because he eats her if you give him the key. Her half-consumed remains can be found in the rear of his hideout. In the Bliss ending, if you follow the musician's path, she will eventually escape and set out to hunt for fresh meat. Or she may find Musician in his silo hideout and make her meal out of him. In Burn Them All, she and Chicken Lady will be crushed to death by their collapsing house. The snail is quite something. Or should I say the snails are quite something, since there are a lot of them. His appearance pretty much fits exactly what you're thinking, except A, he's gargantuan, and B, he has parts of a human skull visible. All of the snails are replicas of a man who lived alone in a cottage near the junkyard in the swamp. According to his journal, the man spotted 3 outsiders but didn't approach. This would have been between 1 to 4 years before the start of the game, as he mentions the flooding before that. He also details his ongoing quest to find and record the strange signal he's been picking up on his radio. He eventually comes to the conclusion that the weird signal must be coming from the radio tower, which sounds like a duh, but the tower has been toppled over for years by this point. In his final entry, he says he's gonna take a break from listening to the radio as he has started to hear its voice everywhere, that it's strangely familiar and he can't, quote, get it off my head. When the man began to starve, he started eating grass, frogs, and snails. This didn't save him, and his body can be found in his bed covered in teeny roots. Via these roots, the being replicated him, tossing in some escargot to spice it up. Numerous earlier versions of the snail talk to the stranger as he approaches the cottage, asking him who he is. They also say they can hear some her and ask the stranger to cut them loose. The cottage itself has been crushed by the snail that the stranger can interact with. To get inside and actually chat with him, the stranger has to crack open his shell. Great foot to start a new relationship on. The stranger describes his speech as slow and slurred. His first act of business is to insult the stranger's face, saying he barely looks human and that he should cover himself up. He'll even call him ugly again while gossiping with him, saying the stranger's appearance makes him want to puke. Gee, thanks. I guess we're both starting off on our best foot. Snail swears that he hears a voice calling to him. He wants to go to her, but he's trapped and wants the stranger to cut him loose, promising to leave the cottage and let the stranger live there. Now, Snail has no idea he's, well, a snail. He only discovers the truth in the endings. He thinks his body is just numb from lying around. To help Snail out, the stranger needs to destroy a cocoon-like growth not far from the cottage. Doing so will cause Snail to leave for the radio tower. His dead body blocks the entrance and is filled with banshee babies. Snail is unique in a few ways compared to other replicas. First, there's the fact that the being replicated him multiple times and seemingly got worse at it since he went from large to gargantuan to the point of being unable to move. Second, he is completely unaware of his current state. He thinks he's just a dude still. Wolfman acknowledges and embraces his wolfiness, and Mushroom Granny knows that she and her house are mushrooms. But as his epilogues emphasize, he not only doesn't know, but actively resists accepting it. Normally, replicas are immune to the being's call, but there is a possible explanation that isn't just inconsistent symptoms, which is that the man, prior to being replicated, was already obsessed with the being. For the endings, if you ignore him, he eventually climbs off the roof and falls on his face, forcing him to see his own reflection. He concludes that he's just having a bad dream and wants to wake up. If you free him, well, we already know, and I am not reading that line again, but as per the other epilogue, he has to see his reflection before getting munched, because some dev hates escargot, I guess. And in Burn Them All, he only has one fate: to burn alive in his own shell. In the swamp village, there is a massive tree-like being made of countless humanoid figures. It moves as if breathing, and the human silhouettes gesture in slow motions, constantly repeating lines simultaneously, resulting in a noisy murmur. The stranger can attempt to climb it, but the humanoids will grab onto his clothes. He can't tell if he's being pushed or pulled, so he gets free and refuses to try again. He can also kick the tree, quote, hoping the tree will go silent, which results in a branch breaking off and one of the trees to scream, "It hurts." The talking tree is a replica created by the being of the swamp villagers. It seemingly sprang up the night of the botched raid on the food stores, as we covered while going over Mushroom Granny and the elephant story. If the stranger doesn't burn it down, it will address him saying, "You've spared us. The road will lead you home. Nothing will stand in your way anymore," proving that the tree is capable of more than just parroting phrases. The stranger can't see the humanoid that is speaking, but it's possible it's the same one that said the word radio to him, as the stranger has to go to the radio tower to circumvent burning the tree down. In the Bliss endings, if the tree is left alone, it is said to consume the road home and therefore lock all of the remaining inhabitants inside of Darkwood. If burnt, the path will instead be left wide open for the survivors. It is said that only 3 outcasts, dressed in old rags and scraps, lament over its charred remains. And naturally, if the stranger burns it all, the tree is among the all which is burned. The 3 show up once you make it to Chapter 2 and replace Night Trader. As you can guess, there's 3 of them. The tallest, and presumably the oldest, is wearing a cowbell. Each of them wears a mask that completely obscures their face. And real quick, I thought it was neat, but I didn't save where I saw the comment, so sorry to whoever you are, but I saw a comment pointing out that the masks kind of look like other characters. The one on our left looks like Wolfman, the one on the right looks like musician's Pinocchio mask. Can't recall if they gave one for the middle, but I think he's supposed to just look like a cow to go with the bell. I don't think there's actually any importance to it, but I thought it was neat. The 3 do not speak and communicate only in gestures. The eldest is carrying a huge sack that, when opened, releases an intense smell of mushrooms. It isn't clear if their muteness is a choice or an indication of the plague. They really don't exhibit any of the plague symptoms otherwise, and most notably, they don't seem to be under the influence of the being at all. They don't go down the road home, but rather stay with the talking tree. If the being is burned, they don't even move from their vigil and burn alive rather than leave it behind. The 3 are obsessed with the talking tree. Cripple mentions being awoken by them on occasion, hearing their bare feet on the wood and the clinking of a bell, aka the cowbell worn by the eldest. If the stranger burns the tree down, the 3 will stop coming to trade with him. The reason why the 3 are so drawn to the tree is never made clear, but there is a very compelling theory that we'll touch on in the dedicated theory section. The 3 make a surprising amount of background appearances. I mean, not from our perspective, but from notes, items, comments made by other survivors. Cripple mentions they pass through the village often to visit the tree. Elephant Mother mentions a group of 24 or so savages showing up near her house about 2 years ago, aka sometime in 1985. The group was led by 3 weirdos dressed in old rags. A journal found in the radio tower indicates that earlier that year, in April, a group of at least 12 locals made it into the cellar of one of the hideouts. It's possible that the hideout in question is the swamp hideout, as the hideout contains a government tunnel and is said to be in 3C, which is the swamp. The journal goes on to state that they were mostly mud-covered savages, but 3 among them were wearing unusual clothing, weird rags. Item-wise, the stranger can find 2 iron cowbells. One is just beyond the door in Tunnel 21, which leads to the swamp. It is rusty and pitted with strange patterns which look like the markings made by savages. The second cowbell is found in a sack near 3 graves in the area around the radio tower. It is in much better condition, though slightly rusty, and it has the strange markings. And yes, if you look closely at the three, the cowbell that the eldest is wearing has the strange markings on it. In the Bliss ending, they remain in Darkwood mourning the talking tree. In Burn Them All, if the tree is spared, the three hug the talking tree and make no attempt to escape, burning alive with it. And if the tree is already burned, they are so grief-stricken by the tree's death that they just stand in its ashes and burn. Ah, Wolfman. What can be said about Wolfman that would not lead to insulting him and being eaten for the trouble? He's an anthropomorphic wolf wearing a red jacket with a bullet hole through it and packing in a K. He is not a good boy and far from being the best boy. He is incredibly full of himself, aggressive and sadistic. He hates the Silent Forest villagers. This is partially because of prejudice towards him, as he mentions that they think they're superior because they have human gobs and treats us and the disaster face that is the stranger like leopards. But it also is a part of his possessive, sadistic nature. He sabotages Piotrek because he finds it amusing, and in one epilogue is said to calmly bask in their misery. He asks the stranger to kill the mother of pigs, and if we're generous, we could assume it is because his sensitive doggo ears don't like her horrific squealing, but it's more likely that he simply wants the villagers to become crazed and desperate as they starve. He seems to be not at all afraid of the various horrors lurking in the woods. He lives in the ruins of a barn in Old Woods, a place he shares with countless dogs and huge dogs. He has decorated the interior with red string lights because he's quirky like that, I guess. More quirky, though, are the human trophies he's decorated the place with. Wolfman pops up in the stranger's hideout in the dawn of day 2 if he isn't found at his camp before then. He informs him that he can help him find his missing key if he can prove that he isn't weak by making it to the Silent Woods. Once the stranger makes it there, he offers to help him find the doctor if he'll give him the key to Pretty Lady's room. If this is done, Wolfman points the stranger to the train wreck but says he won't actually be able to meet the doctor. If the stranger goes and finds him in his hideout in Old Woods, Wolfman will thank him for giving the key and offer to take him to the house where the doctor had held him hostage. If the stranger ignores Wolfman's request and doesn't kill him, the Wolfman will be infuriated that he was ignored and that the stranger was behaving like an independent being in his forest of all places. In Chapter 2, after a few nights, he will steal a bunch of items from the stranger and lure him to a sawmill. At the mill, he will tell the stranger to leave everything he's carrying with him on a body and allow him to arm himself with a knife, table leg, and some healing items. And naturally, he fights completely fairly, sending in some huge dogs to weaken the stranger before entering the fight himself. If he's killed, the stranger gets all of his stuff back. But if he loses, all of the stuff will be lost, and Wolfman will leave behind a consolation prize of, poop. In the Bliss ending, if the stranger ignores Wolfman, it is said that he continued to live in his abandoned barn, listening to the misery of the forest inhabitants. If the stranger follows his path, Wolfman satisfies his insatiable hunger by consuming Pretty Lady and then retreats into his hideout where, it is said, he spent the rest of his existence chasing his own tail. It's true what they say, only bad guys get good epilogues. If the stranger loses to him at the sawmill, the wolf basks in his victory, but his single deepest desire remains unfulfilled. In Burn Them All, he only has one fate, which is that no one knows what happened to him. The twins family. This isn't so much a character, but rather a story of a family, with the names of none of the characters being known. During the church dream sequence, the stranger picks up a strange box. This causes a black chomper to appear, which repeats the following: a red seesaw, a white dress, a black box for my girls. If the stranger doesn't kill the black chomper in the dream, then a madman appears in the church in the real world. The madman repeats, "So many candles, so many flowers. A red one, a green one, for my little girls." If the stranger kills the chomper in the dream, they get a medallion which shows an unsettling, lovely picture of twin girls. This medallion can be gotten again in the real world, either from the body of the chomper if he is killed, or from a madman that the stranger can kill. This is one of a few instances of the stranger hallucinating black chompers in place of real, confirmed people. The madman will accuse the stranger of theft when he sees the strange box. After the stranger tries the trap door revealed in the dream, the madman will tell him the code needed. The church basement varies slightly depending on what the stranger did in the dream. Normally, it is infested with red chompers, but if the black chomper is killed, it will instead be much more manageable huge dogs. Back to the strange box. The Wolfman is necessary for it to be opened. He tells the stranger where to go to find the key and insists that he bring him both the box and the key and not try to open it on his own. The twisted key is found within the church basement and is a very accurate description. What the hell happened to this thing? From the box, the stranger receives 7 drawings made by a child, which spell out a good portion of the mystery in a series of tragic Crayola-fueled images. In the first, we see a house surrounded by trees. In front of it are 3 stick figure people, a tall one in blue and 2 shorter figures wearing pink and green dresses, respectively. There's also a spotted dog with huge teeth? What the? In the second, the doggo with the big chompers is shown standing next to 2 mushrooms, one blue and one red. He is eating the red one. In the third image, the girls are shown holding hands with the man. The man's arm has a red spot and red dots trailing from it. Despite this, he is smiling like a goof while the 2 girls are sad. Drawn beneath the ground is the spotted dog with an arrow and the name Burek. In the fourth, things are looking up for the girls. The man is shown to be tearing apart a red dog house with an axe, and the girls are shown playing on a red seesaw. But in the fifth, it's back to shit. The girls are running away with their father as their house is burned to the ground. In the sixth and most busy image, there is a line of people standing in the church. A man in glasses wearing a coat is pointing people to a hatch. The girls and their father are standing near the back. In the seventh and final image, the girls are drawn in a dark room holding one another. The father is not depicted. People are shown behind them laying on the ground, and for some reason they drew this spider in the corner. The red seesaw can actually be found in-game, still intact outside of the burned houses in Dried Meadow. Under a sofa, there is a safe containing a white dress. With that, the stranger has all of the parts of the blank chomper's phrase. The red seesaw outside of the house, the strange box, which had the drawings, the white dress. Before we move on, I want to point out that musician is depicted in the 6th drawing. Incidentally, he looks more human than some of the other people in this line. This suggests that the plague hit him more recently and that he wasn't born horribly mutated. Last but certainly not least, the stranger. Protagonist though he be, you get to know a very little about him. The Bliss ending shows us that he lives in a not stellar apartment block. He lives with his dog, Jurek. He also has a significant other who appears in one of the dream sequences, but otherwise nothing is known about her. The plague messed him up bad. Wolfman nails it when he describes the stranger as having a disaster of a face. He's wrapped most of his face up with a scarf, but what we can see is pale and scarred. He's wearing clothes he took from a scarecrow, including a large brown hat and coat. And for some reason, the scarecrow had gloves? Which is odd, because his game avatar doesn't even look like he's wearing gloves. If the player is killed during the train wreck dream, an item can be found in a camp, which is heavily implied to belong to the doctor, meaning that the items within it are also his. The doctor stole all of the pages in the stranger's journal when he kidnapped him back in the prologue. But that isn't our only way of connecting the stranger to the torn page from a journal. To get the obvious out of the way, the stranger has a journal which has had pages torn out, and this is called Page Torn from a Journal. But further, in one of the dreams, which occur after getting high on mushroom juice, the stranger relives a morning in his apartment. During, if you flick on the TV, a kid's cartoon plays via subtitles. According to the torn page, the author watched Plastu Showy Pamietnik, which is a real kid's cartoon. Now, I cannot accept that there are two outsiders in this grimdark world that watch kids' cartoons. And we're not talking children around age 11. We're talking primary school age. This isn't, oh, I watched some Avatar: The Last Airbender before I went to sleep. It's, I watched some Teletubbies. That is much too specific of a quirk to have. The torn journal page reveals a man who is bored and watches, as we established, children's cartoons. He enjoys sports as he sat through the news, which he seems to despise, in order to hear the Sports Digest. It also tells us he is something of a veteran to Darkwood, having gone 5 times. The trip that ended in disaster was going to be exceptionally long, as they would be nearly to the last zone. Safe to say that this was Tunnel 21, which he has the key for, and which leads to Sector 0. He notes the tunnel is starting to give under the pressure of the roots, which definitely fits Tunnel 21, but because the job was urgent, their safety wasn't being taken into account. Well, it wasn't the tunnel that was the problem anyhow. Now, I've seen people suggest that the stranger is actually a kind, friendly guy, citing the Bliss ending and Night Trader being just the coolest, which, while I agree, Night Trader is in fact the coolest, I think using the Bliss ending as evidence of his behavior is kind of silly. The entire point of the Bliss ending is to be an enticing trap, an illusion to draw the stranger in. And a lot of his behavior in the game is player determinant, so that's out. But the torn page was written by him before he became a plaything of the being, and it reveals a
quack, 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 quack.
He's bored by his average life while away on leave from expeditions to Darkwood, a place ravaged by plague where people are living through hell just barely. He even suggests that maybe the survivors just like Darkwood so much they just don't care what the outsiders are doing, as a half-hearted explanation as to why they have yet to find out about the government expeditions. The stranger actually acknowledges his dickish nature when inspecting himself in the mirror in the pig shed, saying, "You are one ugly bastard. I guess you got what you deserved." Which doesn't seem like someone who is kind and friendly would say about themselves. As alluded to elsewhere, the stranger is mute. It isn't uncommon to see people refute him being mute, instead suggesting that he just chooses not to speak. People point towards him revealing the location to the doctor, him addressing his neighbor in the Bliss ending, and him responding to an event in the night with, "Soon I'm close." But the stranger doesn't respond his comments in his head. Spoken dialogue always appears over the character and not in the subtitle line. For example, him talking to his dog or the neighbor, but both of those occur in the Bliss ending as well, and I've already said my piece on that, so let's avoid beating the equine sense past. As for him revealing the location to the doctor, it's unfortunately very vague. The stranger just writes that he revealed the location. It's heavily implied that the doctor dosed him with Esssence both times, in the prologue and in the train wreck. It's entirely possible that the stranger, in a drug-induced haze, pointed at the location on the map. The doctor knows that the stranger's mute, so he may have specifically held out the stranger's map for him. That's how the stranger directs the doctor if he isn't ambushed and chooses to be friendly. There's also the fact that one of the side effects of becoming a savage is loss of speech, which can be seen not only with the savage mobs, but with the Doctor. He goes from long theories about the outsiders being foreign bodies and the living organism of the forest, and that the monsters are raging white blood cells, to barely speaking a coherent sentence. And the stranger has the plague, as I mentioned when talking about it earlier. The wishy-washy infection rate of the plague is a real pain in the tuchus, because the Doctor only loses his speech when he's on the edge of turning full savage, while the stranger isn't even remotely that far along. He seems perfectly content to keep his hat and scarf, and in the true ending he, burns the object of worship to death. But wishy-washy is the name of the game with the plague, so... The soft world building and strange happenings that go on in Darkwood open it up to a lot of theories, which is probably the most interesting part of the game for me. I'm going to start with what I call all but confirmed. Night Trader is a replica of the stranger. The primary evidence for this is a line when you first meet him, and 2 of his possessions. When the stranger sees him for the first time, we get the following description. A man, roughly my size, is standing before me. I could barely make out his disturbingly familiar features through the matte visor of his helmet. When you find the poor guy murdered later, you can very considerately dig through his pockets and find that he has a weird book and the key to the underground. Both items show clear signs of being replicas, with the book straight up being made of a colony of mushrooms. The key, in addition to being misshapen, has those telltale mushrooms on the neck. The stranger was carrying both a journal and a key to the same tunnels when he was found by the Doctor. Technically, he could be a replica of any outsider who also had a journal and a key to Tunnel 21, but there's a few things that lead me to believe that he is supposed to be a U replica and not a random one. First, the stranger calls his features disturbingly familiar. This implies that he knows the person somehow. But he doesn't follow that up with something like, I recognize him from another team, or he was one of my team, or anything like that. He just leaves it at disturbingly familiar. Why disturbingly? If he just looked like somebody he knew from one of the other teams or his own, why would that be disturbing? Then there's the storytelling perspective. What's the point in having him be a clone of a random person that you never meet versus him being a clone of you? Think about his very short but very sad arc. He tracks you down to where you're being held captive, saves you, gives you supplies, and tries to encourage you to just play it safe and survive. Don't try to go deeper into the woods. He follows you to the swamp, presumably because he was taking his own advice and sticking together. And what does he get? Attacked, decapitated, and his visor is defaced with the word liar. It's only then that you can dig through his pockets and find the clues that point to him being a replica. It's a gut punch. And what's more of a gut punch? Random replica of an outsider or an imperfect version of yourself? Also, why specifically that key and a journal if he was supposed to just be a generic outsider? The key could have been to any of the other tunnels, and the journal could have been any other item associated with outsiders. Wolfman is a replica of the hunter. This is another theory that has strong evidence. A common theme among replicas is that they have hybrid elements. The mushroom granny is mushrooms plus old lady, the snail is a giant snail and a human hybrid, the trader is merged with the remnants of a hazmat suit. This trend continues with the Wolfman, who, as the name implies, per 90% of the named things in Darkwood, is part man, part canine. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in 3 rings. There's a location in Old Woods called the Hunter's House. Inside, there's a body, thoroughly wrapped up in vines, which is carrying a wedding ring. Another wedding ring, which is identical item-wise, can be found in Pretty Lady's room. And the third belongs to the Wolfman, which can be looted off of his body if you choose to kill him. Unlike the other two rings, though, this is a unique item. It is described as looking like a bad imitation with a matte texture and a rough, uneven surface which screams poorly made being replica. It also ties Wolfman to the hunter and Pretty Lady. The Wolfman is obsessed with Pretty Lady. If you give him the key to Pretty Lady's room and then talk to him, he says, "Whatever would I do without you? You're not such a worthless piece of carcass as you look. Thanks to you, I feel fulfilled. I got my girl, my sweet little lady back." Hard to believe the same blood flows through the veins of the bitch who reeks of chickens. His epilogue also describes getting the Pretty Lady as his single, deepest desire. Another clue is the shared taste and decoration. The hunter has animal head trophies, and the Wolfman has human head trophies. The three are the eldest sons of the elephants. This isn't going to be very expansive because we already connected the photo of three boys to the elephants, thief, and mushroom granny before. Piggybacking off of that connection, all we essentially have left is to make some connections between the three and the family. First, let's address the coincidence. There are three boys who were banished from a village and are said to wander the woods, and there are three youths who wander the woods with savages. When you're comparing just a single individual, it's a lot easier to argue for coincidence, but the developers chose to tell the story of three boys being cast out and then present a group of three mysterious youths who are explicitly called outcasts. The three's obsession with the talking tree is explained if they're the three boys, as the tree is an amalgam of the village. Cripple confirms that the elephant's father is among those replicated into the tree. That would mean that should the boys be the three, they are routinely visiting their father and perhaps other people from the village before everything went south. Without the familial connection, the three choosing to burn to death while hugging the tree makes a lot less sense. They are clearly not under the call of the being, otherwise they would have long since traveled the road home, which they had access to before the stranger even. Elephant Mother tells the stranger that about 2 years ago, 24 savages camped not far from her home. They were led by the three, and they watched her house and stared into her windows. If the three are the boys, this means they found their mother and little brothers. It is obvious from how Elephant Mother talks about the event that she has no idea that the three were her children, which isn't surprising since they're dressed from head to toe and she wouldn't be able to see their faces. It is also clear that they never actually walked up to the house, at least not while she was awake, and then they left. Why they never tried to make contact is hard to say, but I can't imagine a family reunion with 24 mentally unwell strangers would go super well. Hanuska and the Red Chomper. Chicken Lady gossips about a villager called Hanuska that she says has lost her mind. She gave birth to an abomination, and the villagers, to quote Chicken Lady, had the jitters, so they did the perfectly sensible thing and burned down Hanuska's home with her husband inside. We can only hope he was already dead, but in this world... In the village, the stranger can find a woman sitting inside the ruins of a building. She won't talk to the stranger, only muttering, "Kill the pig," when he goes to leave. Inside of the crate that she's sitting next to, the stranger can find a burnt doll, suggesting that the damage to the house was caused by a fire. This lady is poor Hanuska. And, here's where the Red Chomper comes in. The fate of the child is never stated, but while exploring the village well, the stranger encounters a Red Chomper that he notes is small. When killed, it drops an unburnt doll, which is identical to the burnt doll in the remains of Hanuska's home. The connection is as clear as it is tragic. The Red Chomper was Hanuska's child. But it gets worse. The floor of the well is littered with markings. Some are very simple, like the ones in the starting room. They're just concentric circles. Others look similar to the markings that savages like to make, like these, which can be found just past the second room. Weirdly well-drawn straight lines and circles. Then you have these, which are much more poorly made, more like a drawing you'd get from your kid and hang up on the fridge. The drawings in the first big chamber look like a tall figure reaching for a much smaller figure. To the right, there are multiple less detailed figures, and the one on the left is a large face with sharp teeth. These childlike drawings tell us a few tragic things about Hanuska's kiddo. They were not a newborn, but at least old enough to have a vague understanding of what was going on. It seemingly survived for a time drinking the hazy water, and food-wise, there's plenty of mushrooms and presumably plenty of bugs. There's also the matter of the backpack at the well entrance. I'm 100% willing to go with that just being player convenience, but it could be interpreted as someone throwing supplies down the well. Would be kind of hard to draw without some sort of light. Less substantiated theories. The stranger is also a replica. The theory goes that rather than playing as the survivor of an outsider team that was attacked and slaughtered by savages, you are instead playing a replica of one of the men who died in the attack. The evidence in support of this theory is most replicas are made out of somebody who is already dead, such as Snail and Wolfman, or who can safely be presumed dead, such as Mushroom Granny. Wolfman's behavior towards stranger. He asks if the stranger is pretending to be human, and he includes the stranger as part of the us who are treated as lepers by the villagers, all because they have human gobs. There are instances of multiple replicas of the same subject existing at the same time, namely the snail. Now, this is not a theory that I buy into myself. None of the arguments are very convincing. While most replicas are of someone who is presumed dead, I don't think this is an actual requirement. Rather, I think the subject just has to be in contact with the being for long enough to make a template. We have no idea how long the stranger was tied to the tree before escaping. Wolfman could be referring to the stranger being an outsider who are treated just as poorly by the villagers. The human gob jab is likely just him referencing, as he puts it, the stranger's disaster of a face. It is heavily implied the stranger has the plague, but none of the known replicas, or even maybe replicas, are known to have the plague. And probably the biggest nail in the coffin for me is if we as players are supposed to conclude that the character we're playing is also a replica, then he should have some replica item on him. But instead, he not only has 2 real items, but both of those items are replicated by Night Trader. So he would have had to have either replicated when the subject didn't have those items on him and then stole them from him, or he had the replicated items and chose to throw them away for some reason, and then the Night Trader would have to replicate the stranger once he had the real items, or he found and kept the replicas. So Janek is Chicken Lady's younger brother and the man who attacks the stranger when he opens the locked room in the prologue. His identity is confirmed when you steal his toy chicken and show it to his sister. He has a house in the village which can only be accessed by going through the well and emerging through a tunnel in the floor. The house can be connected to Janek thanks to the key to the pretty lady's room being found within. Now, as to him traveling the fast track to Savagedom, the musician mentions that Janek used to play with him by the well, but then the well got weird and the water became hazy and it shows weird images. After that, he mentions that Janek used to hang around the well often and stare into it as if looking for something or someone. Chicken Lady says her little brother got mad a couple of days ago, which could be taken 2 ways. He was angry mad or he was crazy mad. Crazy mad fits with what musician said, and it fits my theory better, so we'll go with that interpretation. When the stranger arrives in the village, the well is damaged and partially closed off. The wellhead lies broken on the ground, and no bucket or rope can be seen. After securing a chain, the stranger can descend into the well and find the bucket and rope at the bottom. This seems to point to the damage being intentional. The villagers cut the rope, dropping the bucket into the well, and then covered the top and broke the well head for good measure. Well, if Chicken Lady was being literal, Janek only started getting funky in the past few days, but assuming the damage to the well correlated to what happened with Hanuska, that was, according to her, a long time ago, which is a bit more vague than a couple of days, but the point stands. By the time Janek started getting weird, the well was already damaged. I think Janek, starting to succumb to the savage plague, saw something in the well, likely caused by hallucinations that are a key symptom of the plague. Just ask old Stranger Boy. Because the well was damaged, Janek needed another way inside, so he dug one through the floor of his house. There are two distinctly different types of markings in the well. The precise ones, which are in the style of the savage's markings, with circles and straight lines, and the rough, overlapping, poorly made done markings which resemble a child's drawings. Only a room away from the exit to Janek's house, there is even a room which features both the savage's markings and the child's drawings competing for the same floor space. I think Janek started drawing the savage markings. We know from the doctor that the compulsion to draw the markings comes pretty early on, and the person is still perfectly capable of logic and speech. Now, things get a little hinky hereabouts. Obviously, Janek is going to have to run into the Chomper. There isn't a lot of space down there. Some of the savage-esque markings can be found by the well entrance, so how would he have made those without bumping into little Chompy? My best guess is that the transformation hadn't happened yet, so he could mess around without getting his face bitten off. Because the progression of the plague is so open-ended, and we don't know for certain how long a red chomper can be dormant, only that we know that it can happen very quickly thanks to Musician and his parents, it's hard to say how viable that is. The wolf in Wolfman was actually burek. This theory stems primarily from the mysterious connection that the Wolfman has to the strange box and an otherwise hard to place anywhere photo that can be found within the hunter's home, who we know has strong connections to Wolfman. After the stranger gets it, Wolfman shows up in his hideout, and when shown the box, he tells the stranger where he can find the key to open it, and insists on opening it up. Now, that part I'm fairly sure is just supposed to be him being excited about finding out what's in it, which is reinforced by how disappointed he is when he does open it, but there are a few things of note. First, he comments on it like the box is something special and not just like a locked keepsake box. Second, the stranger notices the Wolfman is wagging his tail under his coat while he's looking at it, suggesting that he is very interested in the item. Okay, I can't find any meaningful way to delay showing the photo in the hunter's cabin. It isn't terrible, I just don't like it. It gives me the heebies. Here it is in all of its creepy glory. It's black and white and shows a road surrounded by trees. On the side of the road, near the tree line, there is a canine and what appears to be a man's body. If you, zoom it in, it looks like something is hanging out of the dog's mouth, possibly suggesting that it has a piece of flesh in its jaws. Get that off the dang screen. Good. So, as I mentioned, this is found in the hunter's house. Without the burek theory, it's hard to fit this item anywhere, like, what's it for? We don't need it to establish that the hunter likes trophies, since, there's tons of them in his house. It doesn't tell us he kills dogs, there's a stuffed one right there. So why go through the effort of making that picture? It's to tell us something, but the stranger could have made a comment if it was just meant to tell a player a minor detail. But with this theory, the photo is used as evidence that the hunter was the one who killed the twins' dog after it became infected and attacked the father. I guess either meaning that the photo shows the dog eating a part of the dad and the hunter took a second to take a creepy pic, or the dog bit the father and ran away and then was found by the hunter and killed, and eventually the body was returned to the family. However, there is kind of a big flaw. The dog has a head, and for Wolfman replication theory to be true, the being has to mistake some object nearby the hunter as part of him, which is implied by this empty trophy mount. Now, an explanation could be, well, the dad didn't let them actually see the dead dog. He either got the body back and hastily buried it, or maybe he just made a grave with nothing in it after learning what the hunter did. I like some evidence pointing one direction or another, but if I were the dad, I wouldn't have shown them their beloved dog minus the big toothy face. The three leave a cowbell and mushroom as grave offerings. When talking about the three, I mentioned how a cowbell can be found at two different locations in the swamp. One in the swamp hideout cellar and one in a sack up by the radio tower. At both locations, there are mushrooms. The one in the cellar is rotten, while the one by the tower is fresh. The bells are clearly supposed to point us to the fact that the three are connected to these locations. It can safely be assumed the takeaway isn't just a connection, though, but that they were actually there in the flesh. Why? Well, the journal indicates that earlier in 87, the year of the game, the three were among savages that made it into the cellar of one of the outsider hideouts. This means that not only were the three at the radio tower at some point, but they were very recently, as the mushroom hasn't rotted yet. I'm not going to assume that they rot as fast as they do for the stranger, but the storytelling is clear. The event from months ago has a rusty bell and a rotten mushroom. The recent event has a fresh bell and only a partially rotted mushroom. There's also a savage still there, banging his head on the locked door that leads to another government tunnel. The question then becomes, why? Does the eldest boy just have a pocket full of cowbells, mushrooms, and holes, and they just plop out whenever it's convenient for storytelling? But what if it wasn't accidental, but rather grave offerings? Savages like mushrooms, and the three have a connection to cowbells for whatever reason. So the items are of significance to both parties. The three have been living with savages for years, possibly as long as 4. Not hard to imagine they care a tad for their found family. As for what they're doing there, I don't know. There is a ritual site with a human body surrounded by crow bodies with one set in place of its head. This is why the area is absolutely infested with banshees and their babies, but I'm going to guess they didn't just make the circle since, infested? The sack with the bell is next to 3 graves. 2 of them appear open, with a third covered with dirt and what looks like a brown blanket or sheet. If the cowbells and mushrooms are grave offerings, maybe they were burying some savages. The talking tree has been sending savages to the radio tower. This is a quick one. While gabbing with the talking tree, the stranger notices one of the figures is aware of him and trying to talk to him. He makes out the word radio, which is an indicator for players to investigate that area. In the second radio tower journal, the author notes that ever since the tree popped up, more and more savages roam their hideouts, and he expresses confusion about how the savages know about the outsiders. The villagers don't know about them, but once a villager goes savage and, as the author puts it, go into the woods and put some mud on their face, they suddenly come sniffing. Now, the journal as a whole seems to be pointing to an increase in coordination, and I think it's more likely the 3, but there are an absurd number of bodies outside of the radio tower bunker, and the tree specifically points the stranger that way. Seems just as likely that the random sentient fellow would point anybody who came along to it, and not that he magically knows that there's something special about the stranger. Questions left unanswered. There are plenty of theories, mini mysteries, and questions I still had, but really wanted this video to be out on time, or as close to on time as I could manage. But I figured I'd toss out the titles and maybe a comment or 2. Feel free to toss any theories and questions, etc., that you have. Everything is a part of the being's illusion, not just the endgame. I don't personally believe this one, because why would it torment the stranger only to entice him at the end? Why not just make the illusion the entire time if it just wants him to be a sleeper? Also, I would expect more hints about the illusion prior to the epilogue. Kind of bunk for it just to be the plague makes things weird, but the plague is not real, it's actually a part of the illusion. Who killed Night Trader? This topic absolutely deserved more than this, but I really just didn't have time. Sorry, buddy. I do not firmly believe what I'm about to throw out here in a second, but I wanted to present a train of thought that I rode for a little bit while I was working on some other parts of the script. And that is that his death is an Easter egg of sorts. Apparently, in older versions of the game, the three were the traders. Eventually, Night Trader was added and took over their role for the beginning part of the game. So could his being killed and replaced by the three, aside from its value in the story of kicking the player while they're excitedly starting a new chapter and confirming the existence of replicas, intended to be a nod to this? This could explain the liar thing also, like an inside joke about him not being the original, he's a liar. But to throw out some more thoughts, it really can't be any person who can die in Chapter 1, as he always dies. Random monsters can't scratch Liar into the helmet. Savage could, and they are known to remove the heads of bodies to set up ritual sites, but wild savages all seem to be pretty far down the infection track, meaning they probably don't have the cognition to recognize him as a replica and then etch Liar on his helmet. The excuse that it was done because he had a key to the tunnel is bunk. It is very obviously not a usable key. If the stranger killed him because of that, he's an absolute dolt. He immediately flags the key that he finds in the grave as useless, so how could he then be so dumb as to not realize the misshapen mess that the Night Trader has is useless? The three have no direct history of violence, so it seems unlikely that it was them, but piggybacking off of the idea that a savage may have beheaded him to create a ritual site out of his body, perhaps the three wrote Liar when they realized that he wasn't human. They didn't attack or kill him, but the savages that they travel with did, and the three just did the writing. Not sure why that would bother them, though. The weird as
quack
bag held by the three. I'm pretty sure this is just an instance of one of the animators having a bit of fun. The person on our left, while looking at them, is holding a sack in a odd manner. I mean, we can see his thumb. Looks more like he's stroking the bag than actually holding it. The mouth of the bag looks pretty weird on its own, resembling ghost face. And if you watch long enough, the mouth of the bag seemingly moves on its own in a gesture similar to screaming. The being can speak through radio waves. The being is consistently shown communicating via radio. The radio tower is thoroughly infested with roots, suggesting that it has taken over the tower. The doctor theorizes that there's electricity running through the roots, and there is some evidence to suggest that perhaps the outsiders were investigating that possibility. The being is female. Outside of Maciek incessantly bringing up his son or his younger brother, everyone lured by the being mentions a female or a feminine voice. What is up with the snout in the Great Lake? Is it a replica of the mother of all pigs? She's certainly immobile enough to have been templated, but there doesn't seem to be any roots touching her. What are those red lights, funky trees, the eyes? A number of monsters can be explained by ritual sites such as the banshees, but those harmful lights, the trees, and the eye growth thingies are a lot harder to make sense out of. The being uses savages to gather shiny stones. Credit to I Hope You Leave Enough Room on Steam for this theory. Plague victims and savages are drawn to shiny stones. They frequently put them in a place of worship, such as shrines, on crosses, or as part of effigies. There is an instance of an object with a shiny stone being replicated. Shiny stones are a part of the being, specifically the meteor that brought it. but the being fails to replicate the shiny stone properly. So it obviously can't restock its shiny stone via replication. At least, not yet. So if it wants them, having the people obsessed with them bring them would make sense. What is supposed to be on the other side of the keyhole in the dream? I've seen people say it looks like a banshee, an ear, or a snout, but that doesn't explain why. The useless Tunnel 21 key found in a grave. If you dig up a grave near the old shed containing the dead elephant son, the unearthed body has a key to Tunnel 21. The stranger says it's useless, and there are so many questions. Is the person in the grave an outsider, a random person who found the key? Why are they outside the old shed? Why have they been buried rather than just dumped into the swamp? Did the person in the grave also have the book, which the elephant mother described being retrieved from the woods? Why does the stranger see some areas not as they actually are? For example, in the burned houses connecting Dry Meadow to Old Woods. The Fog of War view shows a well-kept house, but when looked at, it shows the ruined state that it's actually in. But another example is whenever Night Trader or the Three are in your hideout and able to be traded with. The Fog of War will show just an absurd amount of tree roots. Was the hunter married or betrothed to Chicken Lady or Pretty Lady? I don't know that this one is worth too much thought, but I've seen it pretty often. Heck, it's even on the wiki. The wedding ring is found in the bedding, implied to belong to Chicken Lady and not on Pretty Lady or within her bed. This has led some to wonder if the hunter was actually with Chicken Lady instead of her sister. But other than the wedding ring's location, I don't see why. He clearly hates Chicken Lady, and not in a YA teen romance will they, won't they kind of way. And he's clearly obsessed with her sister. There ain't no way Pretty Lady can wear that ring no more. So her sister is just keeping it. Why in her bedding and not in the cabinet in the corner of the room? I don't know. Okay, that's everything. I'm gonna go consume Ricola like it's candy. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing, and here is another video for you to check out. See you there!